Before we go into the podcast, I want to just talk about a business that I've set up with my friend George. It is called the Podcast Introduction Group. So if you want to join and be able to be featured on 24 to 48 podcasts to be able to reach an amazing audience, this is the place you need to go to. Podcast, being a guest on podcasts, is automatically establishing you as an authority and is able to build your personal and professional brand. We handpick of a bank of podcasters that we have to be able to grow your business and brand. We do 100% of everything that needs to be done by my team. You do not need to lift a finger. You are able to expose yourself to new and relevant markets by going on other people's podcasts. You also are able to create brand loyalty. People will love listening to you and coming back to your products or services, and it's able to increase your revenue. So if you want to be able to get involved, you can sign up quickly, registered with an account manager. There's an onboarding call where we target the podcasts that you want to be on, the type that you want, whether it's entrepreneurship, business, health, fitness, whatever it is. We then match you to those podcasts and you can start your journey. We have regular catch-ups with our account managers, and Google ranks you when people search for you. So when people are searching for you, you're able to see your podcasts at the top of the list. So if you are interested in being a podcast guest on multiple podcasts, we are the place to go. If you go to podcastintroduction.com and go and register your details, we will have a quick call with you, match your podcast that you want to be on, and we can then start this process ASAP. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Back onto the podcast then. Just one last thing before we go into the podcast. I just wanted to talk to you about the fact that I have a YouTube channel that has been going for quite some time, and I am recording and releasing all of my interviews with some short videos as well on YouTube. So please do check it out. YouTube on Absolute Business Mindset. You'll see a bunch of interviews there, all the longer format interviews and some short videos as well. So please enjoy that. And here goes with the podcast interview. This podcast will educate and inspire with stories of entrepreneurs' journey, and we also explore their why. You will learn from successes and failures to be the best version of yourself. Today we have David Carter, who is the chairman and founder at Entelechy Academy and is a business mentor. Hello, David. How are you today?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I'm really good. Thank you so much for joining me today. I feel that we're going to get some really interesting areas of discussion. PE, private equity, as well as your earlier career in banking, as well as your current. You seem to be, the second half of your career seems to be focused around mentoring and coaching and helping people. So there's going to be lots for us to talk about, and I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you very much.
Pleasure.
The first question always is, the podcast is called Absolute Business Mindset. What does a business mindset mean to you, David?
I'm going to answer that from the point of being an entrepreneur. If you're a limited company or a quoted company and you're a business, then you're accountable to shareholders and you've got to make a profit and pay dividends and grow your share price. So a business mindset is, what can we do to achieve those goals for our stakeholders?
Right.
I think for an entrepreneur, let's face it, an entrepreneur is basically anybody who works for themselves. I have a chap who comes to my house once a month and does my podiatry. He's a one-man band. My hairdresser is a mobile hairdresser. He's a one-man band. They're entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And they have to have a business mindset, marketing their services, delivering their services, having happy clients, collecting the bills, and making a profit. And so that profit that they make is enough to pay their mortgage and look after their families. And to me, they're just as much an entrepreneur as someone who's built up 1,000 employee global business. And so I think it's all about the commercial success of what you're doing.
And do you think, because people can be quite, I had Brad Sugars on, who's the head action coach, And he said, when I asked him this question, he said, business mindset is someone who is constantly trying to grow their business. And he was quite dismissive of solopreneurs. And I don't think he'd mind me saying this. He was very adamant that solopreneurs, in his mind anyway, were not true entrepreneurs. What do you feel about that sort of distinction between solopreneurs? Because you've just said that your hairdresser, the other people that your gardener or whatever is someone that is an entrepreneur as well. What would you say when someone says something that counteracts, let's say that solopreneurs don't really know how to grow businesses?
Anybody is welcome to an opinion that's different to mine. But we probably got about 5 million people in this country who are solopreneurs, and they're the lifeblood of the economy. Anybody who feels that they'd be better off doing it for themselves rather than going to work for someone else, I wish them every success. And they're the life of our economy. I also have a theory that, being more than a solopreneur is a curse.
Oh, why?
Because I think on a spectrum of being a primary school teacher who wants to do good in the world and be paid a salary from their local authority through to a Branson or a Sugar or whatever, who are ruthless tycoons, there's a spectrum. And I think that the gentleman you're referring to, his analogies, but there are plenty of really solid, beautiful, profitable, multi-generational family businesses that are also the lifeblood of our economy. And so I think that people who employ people and look after their customers and look after themselves, whether it's a one-man band or a 5-man band or a 10-man band, all of them are entrepreneurs, all of them are creating wealth, creating jobs, looking after customers. And it's only at the sociopath end of the scale that you need to be a tyrant.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got friends of mine who were so I was in corporate for 14 years and left 3 years ago. And I've got friends of mine who have left corporate and more wanted to have that sort of lifestyle entrepreneur. So they wanted to have the nice life as well as run their own business. And they are hugely successful in having the right work-life balance. And one of the curses of an entrepreneur or a business owner is that often like downtime can be hard to find, and you are striving for the next target, whether it's a goal, whether it's a number of employees or a revenue number or a profit number. It can be a bit of a curse. So I totally agree. I think people who have family run businesses or equally lifestyle entrepreneurs are invaluable to this industry, to our country, and can make massive inputs into the economy. So I would actually 100% agree with you, David. Okay. I want you to think about your upbringing. So the question is, tell me one thing in your upbringing which gives me an insight into your life or your career.
Can I give two?
Of course.
The first was when I was 11 years old and I went from primary school to the local grammar school. At the end of the first term, the PE master handed out to the 100 boys in my year Roneo, old-fashioned photocopier, and it was all about a school ski trip in the half-term holidays in the Christmas to Easter term. And because I'd already decided at that young age I wanted to be James Bond, and I wanted to learn to ski and do all the other exciting things that James Bond did, I wanted to go on this ski trip. But I was terrified about asking my parents because I knew they might not be able to afford it. And it was £114 the whole trip. And I'd saved up pounds or something in my jar from caddying at the golf course and doing gardening and various other things. And so I gave my mum the form when I got home from school before Christmas, and she said, I'll talk to your dad about it over Christmas before we go back to school. Anyway, they called me into the dining room just before going back to school and said, look, we're sorry, but we don't want to set a precedent, which of course I hadn't got a clue what that was at age 11. And so we're going to say no. And so I went upstairs and I got my big jar and I brought it downstairs and I put it on the table. And I said, look, I'm only £8 short with caddying at the weekend and doing my paper round and whatever else was going on. I'll be able to make all the difference up. So if I pay for it, will you give me the £8 that I need to pay back next weekend?
Yeah.
And they sent me out the room for 5 minutes to have a think about it, and then called me back in and said, look, we're sorry, we still don't want to set a precedent. And so I went upstairs to my room, and the next day I went into school with my gigantic big jar full of coins, which weighed a ton. And I went to the PE master and said, look, I really want to go on this ski trip. I'm £8 short, but I'll have the money after the weekend. And he said, look, I'm really sorry, David, but we have to insist that parents pay for this, not the students. And so I can't set a precedent. And so I decided to go to the library and look up what a precedent was.
Right.
And I realized that even at that early age, I had a work ethic and I was entrepreneurial. And I basically figured out after that incident that if I wanted anything in life, I had to work for it myself. And so that was something that really has driven me ever since. If I want something, I've got to go out and earn the money and do the hard work, pay for it myself. And the second story is that, unfortunately, my James Bond career, which was, by the time I was in the 5th form, extremely well advanced. I was doing very well in sport. I had played rugby for my county and southern counties and was doing very well. And I was an athlete, and I was fit as hell, and I was studying languages, and I was going to get sponsored into university by the army to go into the intelligence corps, blah, blah, blah. And unfortunately, I had to have a major hip replacement surgery. And no one told me, including my parents or the doctors, that it meant that I could never play rugby again. And I just thought I'd go in, have the operation, and be back on the sports field a few weeks later. Didn't quite work out like that. And I hadn't got a plan B. I'd never thought of anything else. And I said to my mum, I feel such a failure. And my mother said, failure isn't falling down, failure is staying down.
Yeah.
And the combination of those two stories is not everything works out how you want it to work out. And God, 45 years now, there's been loads of things that haven't worked out how I wanted them to work out. And if ever I'm asked what I think the secret of my success, however you want to define success is, I always say I kept going longer than anybody else. I never allowed myself to fail. I picked myself up. I dusted myself down. I got back on the horse, carried on the journey.
Absolutely.
That's the first story. Whatever I wanted, life was down to me to go and achieve it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's amazing. That's a really telling insight. And then you didn't go to university. You made that choice. And then you went into banking in the late 70s and early 80s. So this is a fascinating period. So we're talking sort of Maggie Thatcher just coming in.
Can I tell you a really fantastic story about that?
Of course, go for it.
I got married very young after I left home. And actually, I did go, it was to a polytechnic, and I started the accountancy foundation course. And I actually passed the final exams with a distinction at the end of the first term.
Right.
And I just thought, why am I sitting around here waiting to spend 8 more months when I could be out earning a living? And I knew I didn't want to be an accountant. And I saw an advert in the paper, which I think I've still got somewhere. Come and join the racy-pacey world of high finance and an international officer trainee executive with the Hong Kong and Shanghai Corporation.
Yeah.
I just thought to myself, that sounds like James Bond on steroids. and you had to phone. His name was Vic Coles. He was the training manager at HSBC in London. And I'll never forget, his phone number was 01-234-5678.
Oh, nice.
And anyway, I found this advert in a FT in the dentist. Anyway, I rang the number and Mr. Coles answered the phone. And I said, "Oh, Mr. Coles, my name's David Carter. I saw the advert in the FT and I'd love to apply to become an international officer." And he said, "Oh, I think that application process is closed." And I said, "Well, it can't be. I only saw the advert in the paper today." And I realized the paper was like a month old. And he said, "Oh, Margaret, have we closed the applications for the..." And she said, "Oh, actually, it's today." And so he said, "Give me one good reason why I should hire you." And I said, "Because I'll help the bank win the Hong Kong Sevens." And he said, "Oh, come and see me at 3:00 this afternoon." I went in and interviewed. All we talked about was rugby. And obviously I've got a very nice rugby career story. Yeah. He didn't ask me if I was still playing. Anyway, I got in. And several years later, when I left the bank and went to work for an American bank, and I was in Hong Kong, and they went through my file and they said, "Oh, we're just tidying up your file, David. And we notice we don't have a copy of your degree certificate." And I said, "Oh, there's a very good reason for that." And he said, "Oh, why is that?" And I said, "I didn't ever go to university." And he said, "What does NA mean?" And I said, "Not applicable." And he said, "Oh, we thought it meant not available and you'd lost your degree certificate." So I'd actually been on the graduate training program for 3.5 years without being a graduate. And I did really well in the bank. And they were trying to persuade me to not leave. And the only reason I left is because I'd been posted to Saudi and my wife was training to be a nurse. And they wanted me to go back to Saudi. And the only place in the world she couldn't have come to live with me and work. Because in those, imagine this today, you weren't allowed to get married until you'd done 2 overseas postings or 25 or something.
Oh.
So I love, and basically was then headhunted because of my languages and to work for an American bank, Security Pacific, and with HSBC I worked in Hong Kong, Saudi, Switzerland, Germany, and then with Security I worked East. And so I got my kind of James Bond thing out the way by doing.
I was just about to say, you lived the life of James Bond, traveling all around the world. Amazing.
But I really wasn't that interested in banking and private equity at all, which is where I ended up. I was interested in, and this is actually where the red thread throughout the rest of my career. I didn't like the person that you had to be successful in private equity. And the things that drove and motivated them, all of which were making more money, didn't drive and motivate me. And I used to love getting involved in the companies that we invested in and helping them grow the business and develop the business. And I was always accused of going native, because to a venture capitalist, a business is just an asset that you buy at a low price, you build it up and sell it at a high price, and hopefully make a good profit on it, and people give you more money for your fund. But I became fascinated in something that's fascinated throughout the rest of my life, which is how come those two companies started in the same town in the same year with access to the same resources, and 10 years later, one of them was 27 times bigger than the other one. What did they do or have that was different from the other one? And I always used to call that the performance X factor. And what my fascination became was to understand what the performance X factor was of every company we ended up investing in. And so other colleagues would go in and look at the numbers, and others would go and look in all sorts of other aspects of the business, whatever it was. But mine was always to go in and evaluate the senior leadership team and the people running the show for their performance X factor. And my boss at SecPac, who I remained friends with for 30, 40, 35 years until he passed away recently. He was an amazing boss, an amazing mentor. He called me into his office in March of 1988, so I've been working for 10 years, and said, young man, yet again, record results, record bonus, record share options, record everything. I think it's time you moved on. I smiled and said, why is that? And he said, because you're on the wrong side of the table. Stop consulting and advising entrepreneurs and go and be one. And the other reason I was smiling, which was probably very nervous, it was having to go home and explain to my wife that I'd just given up my well-paid salary and bonus scheme because I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I'd made a really whopping great bonus that year, which meant I got at least a year or so of cash in the bank to pay the bills and set something up. So that was June of 1988, which was the last time I got a paycheck from anybody.
Right. Before we go into the entrepreneurial section of your life, I just want to ask you something. So when I was doing research on you, you said that you turned around 4 struggling companies when you were in the PE firm. And you said it yourself, in essence, the definition of what a PE firm is. But do you think private equity is a force for good or not?
We'll be back after a quick break.
If you're an online business owner and you want to learn what's working right now to generate leads, grow your following, and get paying clients and customers, then be sure to check out the Digital Trailblazer podcast. Each week, we feature online business owners just like you who are launching and scaling their businesses, and we reveal exactly what they're doing to rise above the competition to build a successful, profitable online business. And what's really unique about the Digital Trailblazer podcast is that you're going to learn these strategies directly from the business owners who are putting them into action and getting results. So head over to the Digital Trailblazer podcast. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, or just head over to digitaltrailblazer.com for links to all of our episodes.
Mark, I think my answer is so out of date.
Okay.
I left the city in private equity in 88, which is 35 years ago.
Right.
And in those days, that world had 3 ingredients: people, projects, and money.
Right.
There was no series A, B, C, D, E, pre-seed, HR tech, fintech, blah, blah, blah. It's now so specialized.
Yeah.
And in those days, we had a pot of money, and literally off the top of my head, the first deal we did was a company called Claire's Equipment that made shopping trolleys. We did a deal called RHP Bearings that made industrial bearings, United News Shops, which was a chain of news agents. And so literally you could go from a news agent chain to a ball bearing manufacturer to a desalination plant to a shopping trolley manufacturer. And so we were sector agnostic. It had to be above a certain size. Right. But I think the real gift to me of those 10 years, first of all, I worked in multiple countries around the world. And so I learned about operating in different cultures and countries around the world. But also, literally, during the course of a year, I would have looked at 20 different verticals and understood how you make money as a news agent, how you make money as a ball bearing manufacturer or a shopping trolley manufacturer, or whatever the companies were. And because of my fascination, almost like once the deal was done, the private equity colleagues of mine wanted to move on to the next deal.
Sure.
And there were those of us who were more interested and fascinated. We've invested in this management team and this business, and we bought it for 40 million or whatever, and we want to make it worth 140 million in 3 years' time. What is it we can do to add value to what they're doing to help them achieve that goal? And that, to me, was always the fascination. It could have been a product issue or a marketing issue or a selling issue or a supply chain issue, whatever, a strategy issue. And I think that was my in-person, real-life MBA program. where I learned so much, and I learned how to raise money and exit a business and do all those other things too. But really, it was how to grow the business, how to turn around the business. That was what my real joy was of that period of my life. I felt so rich intellectually and experience-wise at the end of those 10 years. And even today, 35 years later, we're Entelechy Academy, we're planning to do an IPO in a few years' time. Well, when I was in private equity, we IPO'd a few businesses. We IPO'd Compass, which at the time was the biggest ever MBO exit ever. And then I actually IPO'd another business in my career a few years ago. And all of that experience has helped me throughout my career.
Yeah. So let's move a little bit further forward to Merrick & Co. So it was a CEO mentoring company that you set up, that you founded.
You skipped 10 years.
Oh, okay. So you, as far as I understood, you took on other industry roles as CEOs. Is that right?
No, after I left the city in June of 88, the next 10 years, I did 2 startups in the UK hospitality industry.
Okay.
Both of them owned and operated golf and country clubs. And the first one I built up and sold to a trade buyer. And the second one I built up and floated on the AIM stock market. And we were the 16th ever company on AIM. So after Richard kicked me out and said, go and be an entrepreneur, I did effectively what I had done the previous 10 years, but I did it as a founder.
Right.
Bought an existing business and drove it forwards. And so the first 5 years was exiting to a trade buyer. The second one was exiting to the AIM stock market. And actually, the reason that I exited that second business, the one we floated on AIM, was because I had a rather major tectonic plate shift in my personal life.
Okay.
And ended up being a single parent to a 7-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. And I just felt I couldn't juggle being a great parent and being a great CEO of a public company. I didn't have the bandwidth to do both properly.
Yeah.
The kids came first. And so I had to give a year's notice, which the bastards made me work all bar 4 days of. And during that period of time, I was thinking about what do I want to do next, and didn't really have a clue. And what happened was, and this is an important part of the Merrick story. Merrick's my middle name, by the way.
Okay.
And in the year after I left that business, the AIM quota company, clueless as to what I was going to do next, all these people came to me and said, oh, I'm thinking of floating my business, or I'm thinking of raising money and buying another business, or expanding overseas, or can you help me? And I realized that in the previous 20 years, I had got a lot of really valuable experience from buying companies, selling companies, floating companies, raising money, helping develop a new strategy, roll out a strategy. And so I said, sure, I can help you. Anyway, I did that for about 2 years, working from home. So it gave me all the flexibility I needed with the kids.
Yeah.
And after about 2 years, I was at Sunday lunch at my mother's house. And she was asking me how was work. And I said, oh, I've got this client and this client and this client. Sure, it's all going there. And I said, it is going well, Mum, but I got no time to think about what I want to do next.
We're just having a quick break from the episode today. Thank you so much for joining me today. What I want you to do is, can you do one thing for me? Can you go and text one of your friends a link to the show, whether it's on Apple or Spotify or any other of the podcast providers, and text a friend of yours that you love this show and they should be listening to it. It's a simple request, and I really would appreciate if all you do is give that text to a friend, family member or colleague. And lastly, if you do want to see more information about the podcast, go to absolutebusinessmindset.com. Back to the interview.
And she said, oh, I thought this was what you were doing next. So in the car driving home later on that afternoon, the kids were fast asleep in the back of the car. I remember them both in their car seats. And I was thinking, actually, I'm really good at this. I love doing it. It makes a difference and it pays the bills. And so unless I wake up in the morning and can think of a really good reason why I shouldn't be doing this, maybe this is what I'm doing next. I just have never. And 15 years later, I had built up what eventually became the world's leading chief executive mentoring company with offices and clients all around the world. And so that wasn't a strategic vision. It's something I fell into, realized I was good at, realized I enjoyed doing it, realized it was paying the bills and making a difference. And it was very family friendly. And so I did that for 15 years. And towards the end of those, and so I was really fortunate. And again, another funny part of my story, but I remember towards the end thinking we've got like 40 mentors dotted around the world, and all of them have run a FTSE 100, a Fortune 100, an ASX 100. They've all got an MBA. They've all been to university. And I'm literally the only one who didn't go to university, didn't have an MBA, and has never run a big company like that. But I was the one who was always in demand. And I was charged out at double what anybody else was charged out. No one ever had a problem paying that. And again, the tectonic plate shift in my life. John Lennon has a lovely phrase in a song of his, which is, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans.
Nice.
And another sort of tectonic plate shift came in my life. And I realized I was living in America at the time. I wanted to be back because my kids were getting ready to enter the nest. And also, to be honest, I was bored. We had got 3 global divisions. There was a really competent head of each division around the world. There wasn't a 4th division or region to open. And I was becoming a sort of ceremonial person who was interviewing new mentors, training and onboarding new mentors, and maybe winning a bit of business here or there. And there was a strategic conflict in that I wanted to help whole organizations, and I also wanted to democratize what we were doing with a tiny, small group of expensive fee-paying clients and make it more available to the world. And so there was a sort of strategic conflict. And so anyway, I realized that one day it was time to move on. But those 15 years, again, whilst I was in them and going through them, amazing. I went to 50 countries around the world. I mentored people from the CEO of the world's biggest platinum mining company with 98,000 employees. I mentored clients in Russia, South Africa, Germany, Switzerland, the Middle East and West Coast America, all sorts of industries. Had a fantastic time. And we created something called the Business Leaders Forum, where we got all of our clients from around the world together once a year. And we had great speakers, and they were always fantastic events. And so rich times in terms of network, intellectual stimulation. But again, after 15 years, I thought, I need to move on. I want to democratize this. And again, hadn't got a clue how to do it. But again, I'll figure it out. If I work hard at it, I'm sure I'll get there.
Before we go into the next stage, I just want to ask you something. You said that you were a single parent for a period of time. What does it mean to you being dad and probably granddad as well now?
No, my first grandchild's due in August. So
excellent. Excellent. Congratulations. What does it mean to be dad for you?
Gosh, that's a good question. What does it mean to be dad? I've got 2 perspectives on that. I'm sure my father did love me, but I never understood the way in which what love meant to him. Okay. I could never relate to it and didn't understand. I'm sure he did love me in his own way, but I wanted a very different relationship with my own children. And I was told a fantastic story many years ago by a friend who said that think of yourself as a potter with a wheel and a big lump of clay, and think of the clay as the baby. And basically what you're there to do is teach the baby how to use the wheel and what they can shape their life into.
Nice.
And so you're a mentor in many ways, a theme of my life. And so my children could not be more different to each other. One's chalk and one's Chinese, but they get on brilliantly with each other. Very sweetly, they've both got a tattoo, which I'm not sure I'm fond of tattoos at all, but they both got a tattoo, which is a triangle, which is the three of us. That was their solid foundation. I've taken them to over 40 countries around the world. I always made sure they had a great education. They always had friends to stay and sleepovers and all the rest of it. I used to take them into London every other weekend and took them to museums, and we did stuff. And there was a funny theme between the three of us for a long period of time, which was, oh, Dad, you haven't got a clue what you're doing. No other parent does it like this.
No, hold up. No parents. I've got a 7 and a 9-year-old, 2 girls. You really don't know what you're doing as a parent. You do your best. You do everything you can to make their life easier, to empower them, to make them good human beings. But yes, there's books, but you never really know what you're doing, do you?
I always say that if I had £1 for every time I've been called embarrassing, I could have retired a long time ago. But I think bizarrely, again, it's all a matter of perspective, but it was the greatest gift I was ever given. I think I've learned more about being me and who I really am and what's really important to me through that single parent episode of my life. Work, but I loved every minute of it. When people used to say, oh, God, I bet that was hard. I said, it was hard work, but it wasn't hard. It was long days because I'd take a whole chunk of time when they got home from school to have supper with them, do their homework with them, play with them. And then I'd have to go back to work for 2 or 3 hours after they'd gone to bed. But it was long days, but really wonderful period of my life. We traveled a lot, taking them all around the world. And even though the theme was, oh, Dad, you haven't got a clue, you don't know what you're doing. And I used to say, I want to do it this way because it makes sense to me. And the fact all the other parents are doing it the other way doesn't make sense to me, so we're doing it this way. But the beautiful thing now is over the last 2 years, my son, Tom, who's the young one, he says, oh, my God, I'm becoming more like you every day. I caught myself doing this yesterday. And now I just chortle and laugh because it's like eventually 15 years later, it pays off. And so what does being a dad mean? It means being a lighthouse. It means being a rock. It means being wise and vulnerable and open and honest and caring and loving and providing stability and security and adventure and prepping them for their own life journey. And then still being around on their own life journey to check in on how they're doing. And one of the things that I love is that probably at least every 6 weeks, they come with their other halves and come stay for the weekend. It's like all these years later, and we've got a little WhatsApp group, and we text each other all the time. I'm really close to my kids, and they're really close to each other. And
do you know what, David? That is a massive inspiration for me personally, and I'm sure for lots of my listeners as well. One of the things that you struggle when you're working hard and building a business or in a corporate life is that sometimes kids not get neglected. Like, because I'm fortunate, I'm still married to my wife and we've got 2 kids and they're young, and there's a balancing act to being able to get the work-life balance right and finding that time to all those things that you said, to inspire the children, to develop them, to mold them, to be this rock, to be the safety zone, as well as be the inspiration that makes them want to be good, great, whatever, successful, whatever it is. I genuinely feel, and I think this has been very personal to me when I asked that question to you, that all those things I want to be as a father. So I think the fact that massive kudos to you that you managed to do it as a single parent as well is fantastic.
By the way, I've only given you my 180 scores. I haven't given you the 360 scores of the. Yeah.
So just on that, what's your biggest failure that's happened in your career?
Going back to failure isn't falling down, it's staying down.
Yeah.
I think the biggest failure of my career was a company that I had to put into administration on the 13th of March 2020, when we were 10 weeks away from launching. We had a final round of funding underwritten, and COVID happened.
Yeah.
And basically the funding got pulled. It didn't get pulled initially. It was like, let's wait a week or so and see if this COVID thing blows over. And despite trying a plan B and a plan C and a plan D and a CVA, which was voted down by one creditor, we eventually had to put that company into administration. And it was probably one of the most humbling and horrible things I've ever had to go through in my life. 30 people lost their jobs. All of my investors lost their entire investment. And it was a horrible thing to go through. However, going back to failure isn't falling down, it's staying down. Entelechy Academy has 40 shareholders, 14 of whom were shareholders in that business.
Right. Wow.
And half a dozen of them put up £300,000 in the July to help me start to launch Entelechy Academy, despite the fact they'd lost everything on their investment. They're like, this is not your fault, it's COVID's fault, we don't blame you. Remember your mother's words, get back on the horse, we'll help you relaunch. So it went from the most humbling to the most validating thing I've ever been through.
Amazing.
7 of my team worked for that old company. That was pretty disastrous. And personally, I lost everything. I really lost everything on that. And literally had to start again, age 61 or 62, whatever I was. So that kind of wakes you up.
Yeah.
And so started a new business after a previous business collapsed because of COVID, in the middle of COVID. And here we are nearly 3 years later with a team of 20 in the UK, a team of a dozen in India, and a really exciting future to look forward to. We've finished 92.5% of our fundraising target. The rest will hopefully close by the end of June. And it looks like we might even be oversubscribed. We've got a £4 million pipeline of new business for our first year after launch. And it all looks great, but I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't been through all of that.
Yeah.
And when people say, well, what inspired you to start this business and all of that? I lost everything. I didn't have a choice. I had to pick myself up, dust myself down pretty quickly and get back on a horse that I had to cobble together.
Yeah.
I needed to do it. I needed, and I think it was more than just financial need. I had an unfinished business. And this business is very different to that other business in lots and lots of ways, very different. But it's still trying to solve the same problem that we were trying to solve in the old business, but in a revolutionary new way that bizarrely only COVID happening has helped us figure out the best way to solve the problem.
Right. And
so sometimes you have to go through something disastrous and terrible in order to resurrect something that, or erect something that is timely, purposeful, meaningful. And I feel that I've done that. I could not be more proud of my team. They've all worked so hard over the last 2 or 3 years, incredibly hard. They're fantastic colleagues and with each other as well. We're all super excited about what we built and launched a few months ago. It's going to make a big difference in the world and a big difference to companies who've got this work-ready skills crisis, talent and skills crisis. So going right back to something I said, I'm really loving doing it. I think I'm pretty good at doing it. It pays the bills and it makes a big difference, not only to my team, but to also millions of customers.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I would like to, if you were open to it, to come back on my show another time, because we haven't spent enough time on Entelechy, and I would really like to delve deep into that. And there's still another half a dozen questions which I would love to ask you as well. Look, we are coming to the end of the interview. I asked the same 6 questions to all my guests. They don't need a quick fire answer. They don't need a quick fire answer. We do need to be relatively brief for your to be respectful of your time. But the first question is, what's the best decision that you made?
We talked about it earlier, but I think the best decision I ever made was to give up my well-paid CEO public company job and focus on being a good dad.
Amazing. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Failure isn't falling down, it's staying down.
Seems to be a theme running through. Fantastic. Who's helped you most in your career? Maybe a mentor or a coach?
3 bosses and mentors that I had in my banking time, one in America, one in Saudi Arabia, and Richard West back in London, all amazing bosses and mentors. In my time at Merrick, I had the same mentor for about 14 years, a gentleman from Sweden called Sven Atterhead, who built up a global consulting firm, management consulting firm. And he was an amazing mentor, business mentor, and probably a couple of friends that I met when I was a single parent who happened to be mums, who I think were fantastic mentors to me about parenting.
Amazing. Tell me about a regret that you have.
None.
Nothing?
Not really. No, not really. I think I used to say this was a regret, but actually now I'm not sure anymore it's true. But I used to say, I wish I'd treated my children differently to each other. And I used to have a one size fits all, you both got to do it because that's the rules and all the rest of it. And I wish I'd actually been more bespoke and tailored in how to help Tom develop versus Rosie because of their different personalities. And I think I just wasn't aware and mature enough to understand that at the time, but it's with the benefit of hindsight. So I don't regret it.
Yeah.
If I could have my time again, I would do it differently. So I think now the way that manifests itself is I don't treat all my colleagues the same. I try and treat them individually.
Yeah. And what are you most proud of?
What am I most proud of? I think probably doing the best job I knew how to do as a single parent. I think I'm also proud, I'm not sure if that's the right word, that I've had a few fantastic successes in my life, but I've had a few failures and near disasters as well. And I think I've always picked myself up, dusted myself down, got back on the horse and had another go, having learned lots of lessons on the way. And I've never given up.
Right. Yeah. And what does legacy mean for you, David?
There are 4 stages in life.
Okay.
Learn, love, live, leave.
Okay.
And legacy is the 4th phase of life. It's actually one of the chapters in my book, Breakthrough. And so to me, it's all about, and I could talk for hours about this, but what is it a year, a week, a month, a quarter, 10 years after you've gone, people still talk about your impact on them or individually or on the world?
Yeah, absolutely. And they say that you got 3 generations that you impact mainly. So people that you currently live with like your parents, your children and your grandchildren are where you, but I think you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, I lost my father a number of years ago. And I still talk to my daughters about him and what a really great guy he was and an awesome inspiration for me. And I'm just trying to keep that generational sort of conversation about my father and my mother to a point as well, because I've lost both of them. So yeah, I can see why you think that about legacy. It means similar to me as well. And lastly, if people wanted to reach out to you, where can they get you, David?
The best and easiest way is probably LinkedIn. Right. It's David C.M. Carter. I'm the only David C.M. Carter on LinkedIn. So if you look up David Carter, there's probably 1,000 of them, but David C.M. Carter is only one. And so, yes, that's probably the best way.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you, David. Thank you so much for your time. You have a wealth of experience and really inspirational on what you can do and what you can achieve, and also being a great dad as well, I think is a massive inspiration for me as well. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much for inviting me onto the show.
Cheers.